All right, should we go for it?
Yes.
Okay. Let me hide this. First, hi everyone. Thanks for having us back, and to the couple of students that I was talking with on Zoom earlier. It's nice to see you guys again or talk to you. For our workshop, we're going to go a little bit over what we had done and then go through a couple of the projects. The title was The Island and the Grid. We started the workshop by giving our students a list of different infrastructure and utility systems for energy, water, and waste to kind of choose from and start their research. Like, why infrastructure? But like, honestly, because we're constantly surrounded by it in multiple layers, from technology to ecological infrastructures. And like, when researching these kind of like mega engineering projects, it wasn't really about the fantastical, like cyberpunk, sci-fi utopian city situation, but instead more just about a genuine curiosity of how these like complex systems work, like how they surround us and how we interface with them. Case, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, sure. How y'all doing? I'm Case, I guess, unless y'all don't know me. It's nice to meet you. So I think one of the important things about our workflow and like the machine learning pipeline that we're using is we're trying to deploy it in a speculative manner. And what that means, generally speaking, is that we work from a world building scenario, and we operate on this kind of basic engineering principle that while no model is correct, some models are useful. So our purpose is to kind of, try and suss out or understand these kind of invisible topologies of not only the physical infrastructure systems, but in a lot of cases, the sort of digital topology that's starting to overlay these systems, how they interconnect at a network level, and use this to kind of posit scenarios and understand how we might start looking at loop systems, network systems, nested systems, and of course, edge cases. So how do we get there? Like, how do we take an 8-day course, a set of machine learning principles, and project them into this speculative realm? And the way we do that is through a pretty simple process of asking questions. So we started by saying, like, here's the topic. We let the students pretty much pick whatever interests them. And then we had the students posit a what if statement. And from that what if statement, we generate a then maybe statement. And I don't know if there's another slide that actually explains what this means, but it generally says, like, what if generally it's a political question, a political or an ecological question that forces an infrastructure system to adapt, such as, like, what if the city of Seoul decided to go to a microgrid structure? What if there was what if sea level rose? What if intermittent flooding became, what if the design life of flood systems had to be updated from 100 years to 25 years as both drought and flooding increase simultaneously? So from there, we begin the basic research question, and that usually helps. The research portion generally helps us to develop this world build, and the world build we're talking about is not necessarily the same kind of one that you might be familiar with if you're familiar with like film and television workflows, or even speculative science fiction, but more about the metrics. It's a world building based in a qualitative analysis of systems. So from there, we start to develop these diagrams. And I guess I could keep talking, or I could let Laura talk, depending on what Laura wants to do.
Yeah, with world building, we spent a lot of time on the diagram of, first, it was just figuring out how the systems work currently, how to explain that clearly, and kind of condense all of the research they had done into a snapshot that could be shared to anyone who might not understand the system, but then maybe would understand it moving forward. And then they were able to adjust the diagrams or add to them that would like encompass or add their speculative idea. So
And
then,
it's generally not a, oh, go ahead, Laura, I'm sorry.
no, you go for it.
Well, I was going to say, it's generally, I think that a lot of times people think of speculations as being these like kind of moonshot ideas, but we operate much more on a, like a small iterative scale, like, and try to understand how single speculations or single ideas posited inside of complex systems can have ripple effects across that system. And a great example of that, of course, is infrastructure. I mean, as we all know currently right now with, the way the supply, simple shortages in one end can disrupt global supply chains. The price of coal can have this like ripple effect across a global scale. So that's kind of where we derive the name of the island in the grid, right? Like how do micro changes, let's say for this particular project, we selected maybe like, what is it, like 10 or 20 city blocks? Like how can changes at this level of design have a ripple effect globally? And how do we build resiliency within those systems against those, global machinations of economic and climate, pressures, or conversely, how do we adapt to them? So that's the diagrammatic process is really important to kind of thinking through this before we get into the complicated, like, image creating through the machine learning pipeline that we've developed.
Yeah, and this is also like these diagrams weren't just like found from the internet and remade in Illustrator. This is definitely coming from their research and understanding of how the systems work and work together in combination with their feature speculation, and then created by them to show that.
Yeah, I think one of the oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm gonna move on to cycle games, so it's all you.
Oh no, well, I was just gonna say, I think one of the core kind of tenets of the project was to kind of bring the idea of speculation out of the context of out of the context of fiction, where we tend to look at it, and bring it into the context of research, to say that, like, speculation and world building is a legitimate form of research. It's utilized, in tons of industries at multiple times. The general consensus would be that half of the world's economy is based on speculation. Most machine learning models are based on a speculation. So it's sort of like, how do we even just begin to introduce the idea that these kind of, the projecting a system out into the future is, not only a fun thought experiment, but an extremely relevant thought experiment, especially given, the kind of tumultuous situation that we find ourselves in daily. So site mutation, how we did it. Yeah.
So for the workshop, we employed the use of using CycleGAN. It's a neural network and a model that we've used quite a bit before. In getting this to work on everyone's computer and, tailored to their own project, we had to spend a lot of time talking about the data set and what data is, how to manipulate it to maybe get something more specific for what you're looking for, or just understanding bias or what dirty data might be, which is always a fun conversation for us.
Kind of makes up 90% of the, it's like actually 90% of this conversation, of this workshop, was just going through this sort of ontological and not only the theoretical but the practical aspects of data set collection, data set building, what inherent biases are inside those data sets, how can you work with that bias, how can you take it into account, how can you counteract it? Like, I mean, it kind of goes, I'm sure you all know that's a big question that we're not going to answer, but even introducing the idea as we work through these processes is also kind of a core tenet of the workshop.
And then I think because this was all the students' first time playing with machine learning, for any model, there's always the very fun learning curve of understanding that while you might be able to figure out how to run the model, it will not necessarily give you what you want or what you expect. and kind of then going back, reformatting the data set to try and get something maybe that works better for your project, or maybe that's completely different but still works, or something that doesn't work at all. And I think they all definitely had images that ended up working as for a site speculation of what maybe the site could look like based on their world that they had built, but also quite a few that did not work, but still looks cool. So the next layer on top of this was thinking about adding intelligent agents, and we used Grasshopper and a little bit of C#. The scripting of the intelligent agents was based directly off of the research that they had done. Like, how do you show how this system might actually work? The students ended up choosing nodes based on the infrastructure that they had chosen and researched how that system might work, and then simulated agents moving between the nodes. And in most, if not all, most cases, the agents were non-human. Like in one case, they were snails.
That
or
was a good one.
robots, or talking about food delivery systems and or waste. All over the place.
I think as you know, as we talk about the quantitative, building a quantitative understanding of the urban space, like, you start to very quickly understand the role of these non-human agents within these systems. And when I say non-human agents, a lot of times people think I mean, well, drones or robots or Roombas, but it also can just be a kilowatt hour or a cubic meter of water, or any one of these units that can be metricized. And like, I think the intelligent agent system is, a lot of what we talked about is like, the simplicity of rule sets that allow for movement through these, that both allow for and restrict movement in these, urban spaces, and how you can, generate emergent patterns and kind of play with these systems and change the rules to experiment with different outcomes for your agents.
And I think at the end of the workshop, we had everyone kind of focus on this like satellite map image that kind of detailed how the systems might connect or interface with the city, but that also overlaid against their site that was changed through CycleGAN. And they're quite fun. So we're going to go over just a couple of the projects. It was really hard to choose between them because I really liked all of them. I think that the students brought some really, really fun and very new ideas to it, which I always love. So if you guys are listening, students, I'm sorry if I didn't take yours, because I really did like them all. But the first project we're going to talk about was the Trash Island project. So looking at the space constraints that were, as a result of increased densification and the issue of running out of landfill space. And this is something that is, a really big issue right now in Seoul, as well as Los Angeles and most metropolitan areas. And the provocation, Gil's provocation was, okay, well, then we'll have islands that'll be created from the city's trash.
Yeah, and it's interesting to point out that, no matter how much of a closed loop that you try to create with trash systems, material recovery, even going so far as to speculate about, going to the point of manufacturing and constricting the types of materials that are available to even enter into the waste stream at the front end. Numerous conversations with experts and researchers has kind of always shown that there's always going to be some waste. Like it's almost impossible to close that loop. So as densification rose, Gil was kind of like, well, there's always going to be something, so it's got to go somewhere. And I think that was a really kind of smart provocation, because it accepted a kind of an unpopular but interesting kind of assumption. I think a lot of these are built on these assumptions, but aren't all models, right? Like, what model doesn't have assumptions in it?
I think this one was also very fun because the time scale was quite different than many of the others in terms of he had to really think about how long the process would take to transform this. And it wasn't necessarily the upfront cost of building some large scale infrastructure mega engineering project. It was more like it needs time in order to actually transform into this.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. But I forgot that we also kind of like had we gave them those three boundaries, right? Like each project has to exist within it has like both a physical boundary, a temporal boundary, and and a numerical boundary, and that there's like scales of all of those. So like some of the projects existed at the scale of a couple of hours. Like how long would it take to like evacuate a bunch of people from a failed nuclear reactor within the city, to like how many hundreds of years would it take to process and allow aerobic digestion to turn a landfill into something safe. And that's also, I think, one of the really interesting things about working with infrastructure is this oscillating scales of time, space, and and metrics, of which we'll talk about, I guess, later. Sorry, go ahead.
I think his use of CycleGAN was also interesting because he really just wanted to use it to add islands. And so his data set was literally a bunch of different islands, and trying to force them into the river was like a very fun and very specific task that he had decided, and it worked better than I honestly thought it was going to. But then he detailed out how this process might work over time. The wind is going crazy. Yeah, and then at the end, for his intelligent agents, he was looking at how waste might move between material recovery facilities, incineration facilities, screening facilities, current landfills, as well as where the waste is generated.
Yeah, so like it instantly becomes like not only a waste storage and an energy capture project, but it also begins to wrap in transportation systems as well. So like as soon as you touch one piece of infrastructure, you're instantly kind of sucked into the world of all the other, visible and invisible infrastructure systems that are required to like move even just a single piece of trash, which I thought was a really cool kind of like, as it grew, you started to see these layers unfold. I'm done.
The next project was like very entertaining to watch unfold because like Hyundai came at this as, what if Jeju Island runs on 100% wind power? And then looking at how that might work, his provocation ended up becoming there are movable wind turbines that he called the wind spiders that change location in order to maximize the energy output. He used CycleGAN as a way to try and first place where wind turbines might be within the site, although then realizing that didn't really work as well with his project. He then looked at wind directions, like annual and seasonal wind flow, and came up with the idea of a wind spider that might be followed by a battery spider that would, move around the island in order to capture the most amount of wind, depending on the time of year and location. Could also maybe avoid areas of high density or farmland if need be. And then, of course, because they are movable wind spiders, they need the battery spider to follow them and, change out their battery packs. I loved this because when he first proposed this, I was like, you madman, like this is amazing, but like so crazy, except for it's actually built off of existing, ideas of like the movable wind turbine is not, it does exist at small scales and they're working on them on larger scales, not necessarily spider shaped, but not that far off.
Yeah, it what's really great about it is it kind of shows like it really touches on two co-evolutionary technologies and how those two technologies grow with each other. the need for this energy capture, but also the need to address issues of curtailment and storage with a non-steady state energy source. And like the provocation that he comes up with, the speculation that he comes up with, the answer that he comes up with, then forces him to like deploy kind of what I was talking about, I think earlier, like this idea of invisible topologies or like a whole new cartographic space that is, accessible only to these particular agents, and how they're going to develop together under a set of rules. In this case, those rules being, where can I optimize, how much energy does it take to move versus how much energy can I harvest at a given time, and then working across these scales. It was just fascinating to watch this one unfold.
There was a GIF, but it kept crashing, the Google slides. So I'm sorry, it's not.
Oh yeah, there's animations for all this, but
yeah, I know.
the presentation doesn't. Yeah, these are all animated.
Okay, so we also kind of cheated and picked a third project. So sorry, but we're doing it. Again, I told you that I had a really hard time choosing. So for this final project, it's kind of a hybrid of two, actually, by Dahl and Steph. And it was looking at, Seoul's energy needs continually are increasing, and they might require large scale energy systems, of a different sort than we have currently, especially as cities and countries are moving away from coal and natural gas. So the idea is incorporating small modular reactor nuclear sites around Seoul and the site. So first, using CycleGAN to try and figure out where those nodes might be, adding them, and here thinking about the intelligent agents in terms of energy production and moving from, power plant to home or throughout the city, depending. That then got layered on with Steph's project, where he has now taken the idea that there are nuclear sites spread out around Seoul, and the need to possibly put in place a disaster evacuation plan in case something were to happen. So he looked at flooding, an emissions accident. We talked about terrorism and security, a lot of things that most government projects have to deal with anyways, but on this scale with these sort of risks, it's a little bit different.
It's also interesting because they're embedded in a neighborhood, like they're embedded in the urban fabric. Like it's not like they're off somewhere. They don't have a buffer zone or anything. He like put them right in the city. So it was like, okay, well, how are you going to deal with that?
This was like very funny as a CycleGAN test, because the idea for CycleGAN was to try and get these neighborhoods that would pop up around the SMR site. But what he sort of accidentally did was create like suburbs, these little like amoeba areas, which we love, you could say. So again, looking at pathways through the city for intelligence, this actually was people moving through, and looking at the kind of radius for which people would have to escape out of if that were the case. I like don't actually have the video for this, so Sep, if you're on this, you got to send me this video, because when he showed it, it was like by the end he was like, well, most of the people make it out of the circles, like not everyone. So
well, I mean, it seems realistic, Yeah.
So that's the end of our 3 projects, but Case, you want to?
Yeah, so I think it's a lot of work for 8 days to research an infrastructure system, think a little bit about the hyperconnectivity to other systems and possible problems that could arise from your suggested provocation, then deploy a machine learning model at this kind of satellite scale of a district, and then develop a set of rules and code code for a set of intelligent agents, and then bring it all together. However, I think most of them did a really good job. And what it really opened up our eyes to in terms of like this particular workflow was that it helped me and Laura understand or start to develop ideas about how we might deploy this at different scales and what other data sets we could start to label to what other kinds of data we could start to deploy into these models to build a more robust model and help to build the complexity. Because at the end of the day, we're really shooting for, for complexity, like positive or negative, right or wrong. It's really an exercise in understanding the hyperconnectivity of all these systems in the urban space and how, as you start to design, especially for future systems that are going to be connected not only through physical infrastructure like roads, but we spend a lot of time talking about the networked infrastructure of information that is going to facilitate, all of these mutations at the urban scale. So we were like, well, the next steps would be to start being able to deploy these cycle GANs at multiple scales. So not just at the scale of the district, but moving up to even larger images of the city. In order to do that, we've been, looking at developing a web-based object detection system that would allow us to use video. So that's one of the things that we're really interested in adding and layering into this, so we can see the cycle GAN work over time as well as over a larger area, so we can extend the kind of narrative of how these systems work. And the other thing that we were really thinking about was the economic kind of factor. Like, now that we've developed this system and we know, okay, in order to power this neighborhood with this population at this many kilowatt hours per year of usage, how much is that going to cost? Like how can we wrap cost into this to start to expand our understanding of, the implications to the students and their future kind of prospect, and careers. Like, how can we start to understand these from an even more granular perspective? And I think that both political and economic data sets are something that we're really interested in exploring in our, the next time we pull this out of our hat and force a bunch of students to learn it. So yeah, there were a lot of really great projects that took some really interesting ideas about what infrastructure could be, who the users of infrastructure could be. The snail project comes up over and over again. How do you design infrastructure for non-human but other biological agents? There were some ideas around how you would network these. Like, we had a project that I thought was really interesting about developing an app, developing a system for how users could interface with how users and generators of particular waste products could actually interface with that system and be part of it. And a lot of this has to do with how we were kind of encouraging these sort of decentralized infrastructure systems, and that goes back to our ideas of resiliency. So that's basically what we got at, 9:30 at night in Los Angeles. So thanks for taking the time to listen to us.
I think also just that we find this obviously very interesting. Like, this is what we spend time on for our own practice, and then also free time researching these things. And it was, you're never sure how students, I think, will receive this. And because we got such amazing projects back and we got some genuine interest about so many of these systems that I hoped people would pick but wasn't sure about, it was like very exciting and made it very fun. So, yep, that's all.
Thank you. I have few questions. Yeah, I think, there are a lot of layers. There is a research, there is also pragmatic aspect, technical aspect of using cycle GAN, and also the proposal aspect. I think there are so many layers and it's very ambitious. The first question is, you showed this diagram at the end of each project, right? So this big diagram is this network. Are those network and lines, they look very, very messy, you know, like, are they representative diagrams, or what do they represent?
So originally, the plan was to layer it on top of existing systems. So looking at how the grid currently works, depending on if they were looking at, they were researching energy, like looking at where the energy grid actually exists in the city, and then using that. Ultimately, though, it ended up being, we created a grid and overlaid it on top in order to get the idea across, but it doesn't actually line up with the actual grid. I think with more time, you could layer this on top of a whole other, I mean, information collections. Like if you wanted to bring in any sort of GIS information to actually have that line up, I think that would make a lot of sense. But because of time, we just ended up picking like a representative grid.
I see. So that grid is representing the existing infrastructural grid.
Yeah,
in the city.
And also like how to connect it to what we have. So
Mhm.
it was like you start with a grid that covers the entire city no matter what, and then you end up having to change it depending on how it might better fit in within the system, and also the new site that you've created using CycleGAN. So they all ended up having different grids because of that, because they had to each change them to kind of fit better. But
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it's, I'm not criticizing, I'm just
Yeah,
like asking. Yeah, and maybe for a strategy for presentation, I'm wondering maybe you could maybe next time to do like use different types of rendering or drawing techniques. So whatever is actual proposal, it's rendered as a geometry. If they are representative, maybe like it's dashed lines or 2D, like make 2D lines or something like that. So to differentiate it could be a good way to kind of communicate this with just an images.
I definitely think that's a good idea. I think I remember back to like the mid workshop, right? When we had students present their initial diagrams, and there was a confusion about what was existing and what was new. And I think someone had mentioned that idea of separating them. And I think that did add to the clarity of like, here's how it currently works, and then here's our idea. So adding that to the drawing as well makes sense, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I think maybe you present this 3 project. I think the Wasteland Island project maybe is more, I think it's a bit more typical to discuss. I think the second one is a bit more fun and it's like a moving agent. Third one is a little, I think it's quite strong, but I think the first one is quite strong in terms of like, it represents your brief quite typically, I think. So let's remind myself of that project. And I was kind of wondering, yeah, I also liked your earlier diagram about this 20-year cycle. I didn't know that, yeah. I didn't know like actually the landfill can be actually reused. I think that's an interesting thought, but like the provocation of the moving the land is interesting, but of course it's a short amount of time. Couldn't really get the idea very clearly. Like you created network in order to move these lands, but they could have just moved through just normal land road system in cities, or like what did you have to create a new system to move these lands, or I don't know. That's maybe something that why do you have to recreate this whole network in the beginning? And another question is how, like fundamentally, how CycleGAN is helpful in all this. Like if you, for example, if you just from all of these projects, if we just get rid of the CycleGAN aspect, I know it was very important aspect, but if you just get rid of it, I think it still work, you know, like with some kind of algorithmic approach or distance sorting or like mapping or data analysis kind of methodology might give like maybe a little bit more accurate or maybe safer. Yeah, so
Yeah.
maybe
Totally.
I'm wondering, maybe there is some kind of evidence that the results from the traditional ways of like sorting with data-based method and the use of cyclogen to generate and assume and like appropriate a location and position. Why is it interesting? It doesn't have to be accurate, I think. It doesn't, we are not making an accurate project here, but why is it interesting in terms of finding a planar location? I think I'm still questioning, but I think this is not, this is something like a big, like higher level of discussion. I think like I'm in generally having a question about that aspect. Yeah, how?
I mean, I do think that if you were just doing a more, like if we wanted this to actually completely follow along with the research and line up with the system, you would instead use a segmentation neural network, because then you could, you know, train it on what's an open area or what isn't. And it would fit more specifically and probably better within the site. So I think what Cyclogen ended up doing was it kind of broke everyone out of that, the like research to real life agent moving and grid system, and kind of forced some of the students to kind of think outside of the box in terms of like, well, this is what Cyclogen gave me, which is not what I was thinking of, but it ended up being interesting for these reasons, and maybe we'll look into, like as an example with the nuclear site one, it wasn't like the nodes were wanted for that project, but because he ended up with so many nodes everywhere, it was like, well, maybe they should just be everywhere then. But yes, there's
Yeah,
also,
I mean, oh, go ahead, Laura. Sorry.
no, I was just gonna say that like, because it's such a short workshop as well, and like you all know that working with any form of machine learning, but especially when you are not there with them to troubleshoot, is tough. And because they all obviously did such a great job, because they all have many options, like it takes time to train and then to figure out if it even worked or not, and then to start over. So there was also dealing with an element of that.
Right, because what I think there's two answers to this question. The first answer is the one Laura just gave, which is that like from an aesthetic or from an image generating standpoint, like is Cyclogan the ideal one? I mean, probably not. But there's like another level of this, like a much more meta analysis of the process, which is like, what are these tools? Why are we using them? And how do we understand the tool itself, regardless of the output, right? Like so much, I mean, I say it all the time, and I don't know if anybody agrees, but like so much of machine learning is not about the output, but about the input. Cyclogan is a really good tool to begin the process of the long-term process that we're trying to set the students on, of understanding the relationship of data sets to outputs and seeing that visualized in real time. Like if we were to follow a traditional, like get out our pens and our graphs and map it all out, we would lose that lesson of abstraction that comes through the data set. And then, you know, we would lose the opportunity to have to confront that and understand that part of the tool. And I think if you sat in on the workshops, we're having this conversation over and over again. You know, there was a moment where we had this conversation about like this thing that you guys use in architecture, the partie drawing. You know, which we had to look up and we had a big argument about, but this kind of
You have to
idea of this
remember
sort
also that Case and I don't come from architecture backgrounds, so
oh yeah, we're not so
just as a reminder.
you know, and this, yeah, just in case you didn't know, it wasn't obvious already, but this kind of symbolic gestural sort of drawing that the architect would do that kind of summarized the project, you know, in its most raw form, and then was presented as a kind of like, you know, almost emotive kind of, you know, gestural drawing. And one of the things we were doing with this tool was teaching them how to make that gestural drawing, like how to start the process of looking at image making using these new tools. Like, you know, we don't have the best people to teach you how to do it with a pen and a pencil, but we can teach you how to use these tools to make these gestural drawings. So I think that's another really important part of not just the higher order systems level thinking that we're trying to install, but also the kind of tool-based learning that we're trying to teach. And then the interconnection of that, because once you understand how noise and biased data translates through a visual representation in a simplified GAN like CycleGAN, you start to understand the potential repercussions of those same systems at those higher levels. Like now you're like, oh, you know, the same algorithmic logic that's going to guide the ICS systems that control the inflow of water in and out of multiple SMRs in a microgrid enabled 2070 future have the same vulnerabilities and the same issues with noise in the data that this CycleGAN has. So there's a lot of levels working here, and I think that we, you know, did our best to articulate the, you know, I was talking about scale, and I'm like, how all of these issues, you know, translate up and down the scale at every possible moment. And CycleGAN, while not the ideal model for transforming a site, is an ideal model for breaking, you know, breaking you into the all the kind of relevant sort of ontological questions around working with machine learning. And then to the second question about how we place those lines that don't seem to come from anywhere, or like why wouldn't we just use existing road systems? You know, it's hard to talk about it in a quick presentation, but I think one of the things Gil was super interested in was, you know, in order to build his trash islands, he needed to reduce the amount of waste just, you know, by a certain percentage to begin with. In order to do that, he had to add multiple different waste processing facilities, even as a gesture, throughout the city grid, right? Because now because one of the things that we didn't discuss was we had a long conversation about, well, what happens when you put waste in the water? What types of waste can go in there? How does that waste need to be processed? So there's a whole nother system that grows out of just the simple question of, I'm going to build a trash island. And so that's what all those multiple dots and all those other lines represent, is, you know, a gesture towards the complexity of the systems that are going to need to be put in place just to get the trash island started. And then we could go on and on about the 20 years, but I won't. I'll stop there.
I also want to open up some questions from the others. Or SciAC talk. Another SciAC talk.
I actually have some question. So for the second, I'm sorry to go back to this grid again, but then I mean, what Case told us was that this grid system was necessary for this, like the trash processing facilities. Why can't it exist right next to the existing road? Are you suggesting some sort of a mega structure that's built on top of this city to
what I'm talking about is a mega structure so I think there's like this kind of misunderstanding of a mega structure as a single unit. So like, sure, there's a mega structure, but, you know, it doesn't have the same brick and mortar walls. And why couldn't those things sit next to existing roads? Well, there's a ton of reasons why that couldn't be. Most of them having to do with probably the resorting of roads to connect to bring in new sets of trash, because you need multiple new spaces. Those spaces need buffer zones around them because they can't be butted up to specifically to residential areas. We're now talking about increasing the loads of the traffic load and the transportation system. So I think, you know, it is a mega structure, but it's not a mega structure in the way that like you look at, say, something like what was it, like the room for 10,000 people. It's a mega structure of the future, which is really a network structure, right? A disconnected, decentralized system of trash processing that requires a whole new set of infrastructure, not only transportation infrastructure, but also communications infrastructure. And
Yeah.
whether or not it's optimized, whether or not you optimize that around existing grids is, you know, questionable. But I think it's a good idea to speculate that you would probably have to rework it if you were going to, say, dump the amount of trash that he was suggesting into the river.
Yeah, I get that, but you know, like what you're suggesting, just like in the most basic form, it requires a whole new, like let's say a road system that's on top of the existing city, and then you know, Seoul is not built as if it's like a, you know, the grid system like Los Angeles. It has a lot of you know, the, let's say, like the hills, and then the neighborhood formation is very different from the LA or most of the American cities. So for me, what's a little bit hard to digest is that you building this like a gridded system on top of the existing city, and then all that amount of the road, the surface area, is for the you know, trash processing, and then the traffic for the trash exactly. That seems a little bit, I don't know, like
Okay, so one thing also about the grid is that it doesn't necessarily line up, or like for this one, it doesn't necessarily have to represent the roads, because something that we spend a lot of time thinking about when it comes to recycling, trash processing, waste to energy, and all of that is how much water and how much energy you need in order to do that at that scale. And it's a significant amount, to the point where it's not just, we're not talking about just roads being reworked in order to make space for this or for transportation. We talked also a lot about what it would take to transport things via shipping container and boat, but significant changes to the energy grid and water grid, not just for this project, for all of them.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I
Yeah.
totally got cut off. I'm sorry, Songyu, man. I lost you. I apologize. I didn't get to hear that.
No, it's okay.
But I understood that. Let's not talk about grid anymore, because I think it was a representational. It was lack of time to learn the existing grid. Yeah, I want to hear from others that is like out of SciAc. Yeah, so yeah, let's be quiet a little bit and wait for other comments.
Can I just quickly
Yes, please.
add something?
Thank you.
So I think it was super interesting just to see how Unit 3 worked, just because it uses, you know, CycleGAN, whereas we use StarGAN, and just a different way of, you know, utilizing deep learning process. And I think something that I kind of picked up on whilst working on, you know, on this project with other students in our unit, and also in the case of Unit 3, is how, like, the roles of, you know, designers, right? Because it's almost trying to avoid the inevitable kind of imposition of the logic that these specific GANs have, right? Because if we are dictated by how they work, then I think it becomes a bit problematic. So kind of using GAN as a really a tool to generate a new method, I think just seeing that process was quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it is very interesting in both using CycleGAN and StyleGAN. I think that this is why we also spent so much time talking about the data sets as well, and formatting those and what might go into that, because yeah,
because I mean, when I first saw the images that the students produced, right, it's like an imposition of a certain logic onto the map, right? And sometimes it almost felt like these ones, it felt like the generation of images were based on the logic of CycleGAN rather than researchers. But I guess that's where the input of designers go in, right? So I'm still quite unsure how we can kind of use GANs objectively in a way, because I also struggle with that in our unit. And I don't know if you have any comment on that.
I think for this project, actually, there was a point during the workshop that
Right.
I think the students wanted to stay like very like true to what came out of CycleGAN in terms of like, well, this is exactly our site. We kept being like, you can Photoshop it, like it's fine.
Yeah.
You know,
Right,
you can kind of
yeah.
take what works
Yeah,
for you
yeah.
and then get rid of the rest. That's okay. You know, which is always like a funny conversation to have. And this one in particular is very much like, well, the islands were what, you know, he wanted. And he got those, and then it was like, and we're going to get rid of the rest of the CycleGAN and use the existing site.
Because
as
I
opposed
think
to
that's
maybe some of
even
the
more
other-
important.
Yeah.
Because it kind of shows that we are able to pick up clues from what was generated through CycleGAN and then work on top of it, right? So I think that's
Absolutely.
even better. Yeah.
So in my other life, I spent a lot of time talking to like infrastructure engineers, like serious civil engineers, and they're constantly, you know, when we talk about these speculations, they're constantly trying to reaffirm the role of the engineer in this like highly automated future, right? Like, so if all of our systems are being run by these, you know, machine learning enabled things, like what's the role of the engineer? And time again, these extremely, you know, well-versed and professional engineers are like, you're never not going to have an engineer in there. You know, the data is too noisy. It's too problematic. There has to be, you know, it's a human created system. This is only an automated tool with which to like, you know, shave off some of the labor, but there's always going to need to be, we can't simply allow technology to mediate our interface with our infrastructure systems without some human interaction. And I think CycleGAN's a really good kind of like brute force lesson in that logic, where it's just like, it will not give you what you want. And you start to learn, you know, you start to realize the limitations of these tools and the role of the designer. I mean, I think in some ways, it more than anything, it just reaffirms the role of the human, that you need to go in there and move some stuff around. I'm highly suspect of GANs at multiple levels, especially at the scale of the satellite image, right? Like object detection, segmentation, these models I find to be a little more useful because they're just automating a task when we're trying to look at data at scale. But this process of like turning one thing into another, I know that's an oversimplification, but I'm always a little, and also even the aesthetics of it, like, you know, there's a point at which the aesthetics of it start to kind of run a little dry as well. That's just my opinion. I'm sure someone else has a different opinion, but you know what I mean? Like we're definitely pushing the edge of like what we can do before that abstraction becomes so abstract that it's not useful for us. And that's why it's kind of fun to apply it to something like infrastructure, something so rooted in like, you know, raw calculations. You know, like how much does abstraction play into this? Is a fun little game that you can play with this particular project should you want to.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a very, very interesting way of approaching urban design. Yeah, it's very unique. Yeah, it's very challenging, of course. Yeah, and probably similar to Uni 4, how they are using similar technique to design interior spaces, and like we can actually, yeah, that actually gives us a lot of comparison, I think. Yeah, but I think this team is specifically dealing with like especially more difficult agenda and criteria. Yeah, because it's infrastructure. It's not just like you cannot just decide something so intuitively like when we design interior, you know, like we can be a little bit more creative, a little bit more wrong, but because it's infrastructure. It's about urban space. That's why it looks very serious and looks very, very somehow like problematic sometimes. Yeah, that is more obvious than like just some interior model, interior design, or like object design. Yeah, but I think that poses a lot of interesting questions, and there are a lot of small segments of these projects can be dived into depths. Maybe I feel like as a workshop project. So maybe if you like do this many times, for example, then maybe in this year you try this segment of the longer project. Yeah, and really just try the training process and comparing different results, for example, and maybe analyze, maybe I don't know, analyze some pragmatic or efficiency, or I don't know. I don't like the word efficiency or optimization, but somehow there can be some of these things studied more rigorously in a longer span, like stretched a little bit longer span of time. Or maybe you can, if you have like 4 different teams, all of them do same project but do different segments of research a little bit more in depth. Yeah, that could be also an interesting approach. Yeah, but I think it's super interesting topic and very provocative, like many manifestos and like statements that you have yeah, produced. So I really appreciate.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, we always want to do longer versions of these projects. We kept joking that we'll see the students for the week after for part 2. So
yeah, but always this intensive workshop is more helpful for like brainstorming and like squeeze out a lot of like interesting ideas in short amount of time. It's always more efficient. Yeah.
Yeah,
even if you probably do this like in a long span of time, maybe you get similar results. Yeah, but yeah, great job.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. No comments from others, then yeah, we can move on. After Unit 4, we have short discussion time. We have 1 hour actually, it's not sure, but we can extend our conversation then. So yeah, let's invite Unit 4 to present.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I'll just yeah. I always forget how to do the presentation on Zoom. It's just a perpetual struggle I have.
Share screen.
Yeah, it's I'm just trying to see the notes and the thing as well. Oh yeah, I think I got it. So sorry. Do you have it? Oh.
But
See,
the screen
but yeah. Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Right. Wait. Gosh. Sorry. So I think this is the right way. Is it sharing right now?
Yes. I see a cover page.
yeah, but can you make it
we're-
to full screen? Because I still can see the top bar over there.
Okay. God. Why is it not working? So I made it full screen, but it's not quite working.
Is it Adobe Premiere? No.
No, it's
Sorry,
a
where?
Google Doc
Oh, I
slide.
see.
Google Slides. Notes, slide. Mm.
See if you have option right click. If you have option. No,
Share.
no. Okay, that's better.
I think we'll just have to go with this.
Yeah.
Sorry. So we are unit 4.
It went back to that weird proportion.
Okay.
But-
Oh, that's
Okay, I think he wanted to see the what is it? The
The
comments,
notes.
right? Yeah. The
yeah.
notes.
I turned on the presenter node, and then when I do the full screen, it just disappeared.
I see. Maybe then. Okay. This is a bit-
Okay, maybe we can just watch it like this.
Or
It's okay.
Or
I can-
what about the Lloyd? I can share the screen, and then maybe you can ask me the remote control. You can request me the remote control. Then. How about
all
that?
right.
Yeah.
So I'm just going on to the slides on my phone, and then I'll just read it off my phone whilst doing the screen. I think that just so now this is better, right?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, it's always the Zoom disaster that tends to happen at COVID era. Right. Okay. So we are unit 4, and we examine a set of design processes that utilize generative adversarial network as a design tool that consolidates different and seemingly incompatible architectural features. The unit focused on creating design outputs that counter modern architecture's homogenizing force that generates urban conditions assimilating one another at the cost of individual local contexts. We are interested in investigating the current state of architecture and how we could possibly sabotage the homogeneous architecture of today. So these are the tutors. So the starting point of our investigation for the unit was the spirit of the Crystal Palace, which kind of started with the idea of human progress. And this can be witnessed from the pediment of the British Museum, literally named The Progress of Civilization. Along with that, the prevalent theory of evolution at the time has been declared from the science. And finally, the Crystal Palace, which was set up in 1851. Built with the spirit of human progress, the palace embraced an efficient construction logic that also allowed for flexibility, made possible through the birth of standardized structural elements. The Crystal Palace was the most evolved form of architecture that could override all other preceding logics of architecture. The implied linearity embedded in the notion of progress was the industrial era necessarily imposes limitations. It repudiates any other evolutionary variations that took place before the current state. Bound so tightly to the technology that allows for maximum utility, the Crystal Palace cannot have a wide path of evolution. It can only evolve towards a single direction where technology allows for even better utility. With the invention of reinforced concrete, the ideology of maximum utility and productivity gave birth to the architecture that can be rapidly replicated without the need for much contextualization. Fast-changing context of the 20th century, driven by widely spread idea of internationalism and globalism, stimulated alongside worldwide events, which are destructions caused by 2 world wars, allowed the architecture of maximum utility to spread rapidly. Paired with often overused modern mantras like form follows function and less is more. So after identifying the historical foundation of such architectural homogenization as the Crystal Palace, the tutors premised 2 key concepts, typical architecture and untypical architecture. Typical architecture was born in the context of the 20th century, which came with an unprecedented destruction following the 2 world wars and urban expansion. Typical architecture embraces utility and functionality. These are the different kind of bedrooms and cityscapes that this Swiss photographer took, going around 32 different cities, and it kind of showed striking similarity between all kind of cities, which also was one of the points that one of the things that sparked our interest. So we now live in the ironic dystopia of no-stop city, where architecture is defined by the available square footage. Concerned mostly with utility, typical architecture has a narrow path of evolution. Typical architecture is the protagonist behind the global urban scenes that are becoming increasingly alike, such as the skyscrapers whose logic is entirely dictated by utility. On the other hand, untypical architecture is culture specific. It holds the inherent DNAs of each culture, but is alien outside its own context. To grant architecture a better chance of survival against diverse future scenarios, such as pandemic, earthquake, and extreme weather conditions, typical architecture with a narrow evolutionary pathway needs to be tackled. Darwin's evolution tree model could shine some light on tackling the current state of typical architecture. Untypical architecture is culture specific. It holds the inherent DNAs of each culture, but is alien outside its own context. Untypical architecture is Korean architecture, English architecture, Chinese architecture, Japanese architecture, and Turkish architecture, and numerous others that are bound to specificity. When cultures yield to utility, that is, when diverse untypical architecture is streamlined to become homogeneous typical architecture, it loses much of its DNA pool, once full of evolutionary possibilities. Typical architecture is driving itself towards vulnerability by losing diversity. Recognizing this, our unit aims to reintroduce the lost cultural DNAs into the picture. Diversifying typical architecture will better prepare architecture for unexpected future scenarios. In order to achieve this, the tutor sets up the following procedure using StyleGAN, which is a generative tool that can be used to extract features from datasets. So each student defined and collated images for each dataset, typical and untypical architecture. And we kind of made it into a three-stage kind of project. So the first stage would be extracting key features from both typical and untypical architecture defined by students. And number two, the extracted features being identified by students according to their origins. And number three is basically mixing those features using StyleGAN again and creating new design outputs. So Dong-Yun will take from here to explain further on the tool.
Yep. So as a tool to sabotage typical architecture, the StyleGAN will be used, which is a generative tool that could learn high attributes of the data set to create new images. So of different GAN systems, StyleGAN was selected on the metrics of the following characteristics. First, StarGAN converts recurring visual the features from the dataset into numeric value, hence crediting itself with a degree of the objectivity. Second, StarGAN creates latent space in which the user can navigate, traverse, or observe the in-between state of features. Last but not least, StarGAN can recognize readily available images without additional equipment. So without such traits of the StarGAN in consideration, each student group of the unit was asked to create two specific data sets. One of them is a typical architecture, that is generate the utilitarian architecture, and another one is untypical architecture, that is traditional Korean architecture. So these are the example images generated by StarGAN trained only on the Hanok dataset. So the generated images could shine some light on what attributes contributed the Hanok speciality.
Oh, sorry.
Could you back one page? Yeah. So the tutors presume that resulting outputs could be used to disrupt and diversify the homogenizing trend of modern architecture. So actually our initial intention was to create an incubator for mutation between two data sets using a computational tools. So extracted features by StarGAN could be aggregated, generating new architectural elements or scenery. Also, captured features by StarGAN were represented in numeric values, which gave us new opportunities to play with the results. So these are also some of the examples of representation technique. So it shows the gradually changing features within a grid. So this is the schedule. So actually, the schedule of our unit was mainly divided into two phases. So in the first phase, we mainly focused on the research, learning some of the general concept of GANs, like how StyleGAN worked, how to collect images and create our own data set. And after mid-grade, the actual design phase started. So based on what we have learned from the previous research, students developed their own idea. And then due to the limited time and the fact that training StyleGAN require lots of the physical time, so we used Google Colab as additional the scripting environment to train StyleGAN model, which never stopped working in parallel.
Yeah, I forgot to unmute myself. And yeah, can you go back to the front page? Well, actually, it doesn't matter. Yeah, because meantime, anyway, yeah, all the 6 teams choose different types of the typical architecture after their own discussion. So, like we could, as you can see, we could divide by all 4 types of students' result. So our initial intention was to create an incubator of mutation between 2 data sets using a computational tool, which is StyleGAN. Yeah. And then like the output by different groups could be largely categorized into 4 different methods. Like first one is, Type 1 is like from the spatial quality to fuse 2 data set and observe how they can harmonize in urban settings. And the first one was a team 6, and this team was by using 2 different axes of variations, that of latent space and cycles, and explore the potential of StyleGAN thoroughly. So they use these 3 kinds of the different data sets, and from so I mean, like the other teams, like use the untypical as a historic context and typical as a technique and utility and these kind of things. And within them, like they they try to investigate more about the style GAN itself, and then try to find their, oops, there's a little bit of delay. Yeah, they try to find the like kind of, how can I say that, in the middle of the typical and untypical, I mean, from the result of the style GAN, and then they, yeah. Yeah, was the something to show. Yeah, I mean, these were one of the results. And type 2 was like this: from special quality to fuse to data set and use merged characteristic as a design clue. And we had a team 3 and team 5 for this one. Well, team 3, we're going to present a bit more about this one later. So I was just going to quickly show their concept image from today. Like, so they try to combine their traditional and the traditional images and their modern architecture, which is more like the minimized space. And yeah, but anyway. And then these are the results. Well, I'm going to jump this one because anyway, team 3 we're going to present and show that we can, yeah, talk about this a bit more in detail. And team 5 is they try to find the kind of, I mean, their title was Untypical Landmark. And so they define the typical architecture as just freeform, usual, I mean, yeah, just a typical type of the parametric or freeform shape of the buildings, and untypical as a hanok. And in between this, they put, of course, they use these data sets and they try to find some weird space from the result. And in the end, the result was they tried to make this kind of like, how to say that, non-realistic kind of non-realistic world. That's what they tried to create. And then there's a type 3, which is about the from special quality to fuse to data set and find numerous spatial configurations. And we had a team 1 and team 2. I assume that team 1 is going to present today, but unfortunately, I think there is some like misunderstanding because yeah, I mean, I just see them now. Well, their main concept was kind of the layering of the space. So they use the 20th centuries of Hanok and 21st centuries of the modern architecture. Oops. So they try to see the designs. I mean, the like these kinds of mutated spaces through the frames. So these are their concepts and the result of the spaces. So they try to make the actually the frame itself, and then try to see the layering of the rich spaces, and as well as the kind of imagining about the space of the apartment in between apartment and current apartment and the Hanok, which is traditional house as well. And then we had a team 2, and they more try to create the space of the border. And also from my side, which is quite interesting point of them, was like they try to create here, they try to find here the border or the concept of the spaces from the images. So they just draw this older, can say that the concept of the space, just looking at from the these images. And after that, after they analyze this kind of the spaces, and they try to use those kind of the border of the spaces, and then designed one building of them. And of course, I mean, there is a bit of more about the stories about this, but yeah, I think we can skip that one this time. And we have a type 4, which is about from the spatial quality to fuse to data set and interpret it as a new way. We had for this, we had team 4, and they tried to imagine an entire structural system. So what they've looking at was like from the result from the mixing of the two kind of the Hanok and the modern city, they find these kind of more like structural systems, and they created this kind of modular system and tried to bring it to the like a entirely large scale and created new Pungsujiri, which is like how can I say the Korean traditional way of analyzing the landscape, and they try to input their structural systems in their in Seoul society. In conclusion, Louis.
Yeah. So what was really interesting about the workshop was that it allows students to use StarGAN to extract and choose key features specific to data sets with respect to a specific design purpose, but they all kind of worked in 4, different ways that we outlined as Hanjun just explained. So it was just really interesting to see how they use the same tool in a different manner, and it kind of the workshop kind of exhibited its potential in creating various points of iterations for design processes, which I think has even more meaning than the design outputs themselves, I could even say. It also kind of gave us some questions. It's a bit of a funny image of Vera Caesar intensely working on a very traditional mode of designing, and a scene from Matrix. Because we are, I think, at a crossroad, and it kind of really throws some questions in what the roles of architects are in the future using these computer-based tools and processes, and how we could basically use them. So thank you very much. That would be the long introduction to Unit 4's work.
And seems like, yeah, I think team 1 couldn't make the call. I think there should be some misunderstanding about talking about the date and time, I guess. So maybe we can direct. Yeah, go ahead.
Should I just go to
team 3?
Should I just?
You want to just introduce the team 1's project?
I mean, I could just quickly go through the slides. Using so I can just quickly introduce what they did through a screen share. So I think there was a slight misunderstanding. Oh, sorry, that's not it. So this is, yeah. So, yeah, can you see? Can you all see the note? Yeah. So the team 1, they focused on so they interpreted Hanok, the untypical architecture of Korea, and then typical architecture as like an apartment. So they tried to see, like, through the images that they created, or through the images they collated for each data set, which is, you know, of Hanok and of apartment, they noticed a striking difference in how you frame a viewpoint. So they kind of the students came up with this idea of layering that existed in Hanok that kind of disappeared in modern apartments. And they started working with, you know, different imageries, you know, extracted from StyleGAN, and made a completely new spatial model, which was really interesting. So that's the kind of, on the left, you can see, you know, how they worked to create a new spatial quality, and then new spatial model, and then finally like the diagrams and some perspectives. So this was a really good example of kind of picking clues from the mixed, you know, images between, you know, Hanok and modern housing, and interpret it into a completely new spatial system, and then design a new prototype. Yeah, I think that kind of sums up the team one's work.
Then I think, yeah, then we should move on to team 3, and then we can discuss about the project. I think, yeah, team 3 kind of like included lots of things what we try to achieve. So, I mean, Sugyong and Sungwook, are you ready?
Yes. Should I give the presentation right now?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Right. Share my screen just a bit. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, hi, we're team 3 from Unit 4. The title of our project is Traversing Beaches. As the brief of our unit articulates, we're dedicated to exploring the potential of the untypical architecture. We try to identify what untypical and typical architecture are, particularly in Korea. These graphs show the changes that we have undergone since the early 20th century after the introduction of efficient models of architecture and improvement of built environment. However, the problem is it eliminated the local characteristics of the Korean architecture. So we wanted to define untypical architecture by reinterpreting the concept high-end. By definition, the word high-end is commonly used to describe products of high quality that are made despite their expensive costs. And this is a value that is often relished by a limited number of wealthy people. But on the other hand, we also thought there is a value that we can find behind those materialistic matters. Throughout the Korean history, there had been different founding ideologies. Therefore, the artifacts and the high-end products were often being the representation of their culture and identities as opposed to the modern ones. Here we've got the munja, a product of the high-end culture from the Joseon dynasty, as a representative of the clean and humble beauty Koreans pursued. To bring the essence of our culture, we looked at the examples of identities from different times in our history. We investigated old Korean lifestyles, artifacts, and buildings as a series of reflection of fundamental ideology or belief of each period. And all of the above were evidently projected into the built environment that we created back in those times. Hence, we are trying to traverse the features of the spaces from the past to retrieve the lost cultural identities in generic modern spaces. In order to succeed in such maneuver, we had to categorize the elements into chunks that could diversify the spaces we live in nowadays. And these following categories structured the data set of the traditional architecture. As for the counterparts, we focused on the modern architectures under two dominant ideologies. Firstly, the minimality that was manifested through ornament and crime by Adolf Loos, which represents the idea for the elimination of decoration. And then the functionality, which was inscribed by the Le Corbusier in his statement of 5 points of architecture. We made this graph to show how those ideas have affected architectural development. As the involvement of the minimality and functionality increase, the efficiency improves. However, those at the rather extreme end of the efficiency were grouped and were excluded from our data set. And then those that fall into mere original ideas were the ones that we collected as our data. To escape the current generic architecture, by adding identity, we have extended our graph to include another layer, a new axis that extends beyond the flat 2D graph of typical architecture into a new 3D graph. So as this will give us the chance to think about the possibility of getting away from the models of homogenized architecture. Group D is a model that shows in which way we would like to diversify our current architecture. These are samples of modern architecture data set that is in between the idea of functionality and minimality, which do not include the extreme cases in pursuit to efficiency. From these two graphs, we would like to propose how we will make changes, which is to use an artificial intelligence called StyleGAN to learn the features from both modern and traditional spaces and traverse features from one another. These illustrations are the metaphoric representation of our process. Firstly, we are using StyleGAN to extract the common features from the both group, which is represented by the juices squeezed out of the fruits. Secondly, we use them as a data set to fuse each other to extract new elements. Thirdly, we reassemble those new elements to experiment and create new typologies. The desired goal for such a computer-assisted process could diversify the pathway of evolution for architecture. From more than thousands of elements, we made 9 categories to experiment, and we maneuver them to create new typologies. Here, we would like to introduce new typologies we generated. This is an event venue called Yeonghwaejang, which intends to show the idea to align its level to the ground and make the boundary between the spaces vague while maximizing the interaction with the nature. Possibility of making a multi-story building with its front gate connected all the way back to the main building by a linear roof. A new typology of ante, a room for women back in Joseon time. And this is a room that is filled up with walls or doors to diversify the plan and the functions of the spaces for more specific needs. This image is an experimentation of a modern material with traditional idea to invite the nature into the space. Hanok's rooms are typically designed in scale for a small number of people. And this open space with its roof connected one after the other suggests us the new possibility of program that can be embraced by the traditional space. And we imagined how Hanok could bring changes to dynamic spaces by keeping its component of traditional tectonic. Here, this new typology shows how highly complicated space keep the essence of the traditional aspect. This image is a traditional interpretation of the sarangche and can develop and to bring sights from where the building is standing towards. In this image, we try to make a rearrangement of its traditional members of building, moving around to diversify the view. As the angle of the scene changes, the elements moves along. This is more of an interpretation of the modernist ideology. The concise form and the clarity of its elements give us the impression of a modern interior. However, if you look deeper into it, you will notice the clay material finish and the paper-like materials on the partition, which are reminiscence of different features from the traditional architecture. This weird balance between the two and the resulting aesthetics were perhaps what we wanted to confirm throughout the whole project. And finally, it leaves us a question of what high-end really is. Do we all see expensive material as high-end, or does the price matter at all? For now, we say it is what identity and spirit it brings us while we are occupying it. To take this one step further, we carefully analyze the spaces in two-dimensional drawings and model them on 3D space. Interlocking both traditional and modern sarangche, we wanted to discover what potential this image making really has. The number written on the pictures correspond to the plan and the images that they're based off of. And to really give the real world aspect to the flattened elements, we thought this process of showing 3D view is necessary when realizing the space. And this is an internal sketch. And the modern typology from a slightly different angle in order to show the spatial quality. And this is a more elaborated perspective sketch. And we will finish our presentation with the summary of our images. Thank you.
So yeah, our unit presentation has been done. So if there is any comments for this project, either about the unit itself, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. I really enjoyed. I thought I saw this project, but I don't remember you had these 3D models. Can you go back one slide? Did you have this before, or I missed it?
I think it only came about after the bid critic.
Oh, I see. I see. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So that is like you added some sketch on top.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you go to the previous slide? Yeah. No. Just yeah. Just stop. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate your attempt to like try this three-dimensionally. I think it's a very meaningful exercise. Maybe it's because there's no material. And I think you guys have a really good eye and pick a right person always to Photoshop in, like right items, yeah, for every single images. So those were really helpful to understand the style and like the kind of atmosphere of the spaces. Like some of those spaces were looking like hotel lobby and so on. But yeah, Hanjun, can you please control the mute? Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. But I think imagine if you didn't have those people, I think by adding those characters and the items, you are kind of communicating how you understand this image as a certain type of scale and space. But maybe also by doing that, you're preventing other people to understand it differently. Yeah. So I think it's a strategy, of course. Yeah. But when I see, just really compare these two, like if you really extract out all of these other elements, still the provocation of the traditional untypicalness is, I think it's gone. Like it looks like very modern. Yeah. Some kind of like modern Rhino built buildings, but of course, like you are using this technique to extract, but I think maybe now you can go even further to understand what really makes which materiality and what kind of real three-dimensional detail really makes that feeling, you know? Like I think that kind of understanding is so you're translating this into 3D model. Now you can kind of really analyze in terms of like 3D 3D object and the details to kind of analyze why this look like somehow Korean, you know, a Korean traditional style, but yet having some kind of modernness and complexities in it. Yeah, but I think there is a lot due to some of the details. I see that like you have some of these like fins and some frames, but you have wood and white plaster wall, that like that combination of it creates that typical look or like that style. I think it's an interesting learning process. Yeah, so I think if you have those materials in it, it will have a very different impact in how we understand this. But yeah, really enjoyable and yeah, studies. Yeah, very interesting. Thank
And
you.
just to add a few more things. So they did quite focus on the materiality. So they talk about materiality at some point. I really remember from the workshop, and that gesture of kind of translating that into a 3D space, as you said, is like a very interesting endeavor, right? And there's definitely something that can also be picked up just by removing all the kind of colors and materials as well. So it for me, it looks like a modern building, but it also has some weird touch to it. and I also really appreciate that. Yeah, like this image I think is more provocative because it has, you know, traditional Hanok elements, like the chuchudo and everything, but it still holds some very modernness, right? And I think that elaboration of other floss and Corbusier concept was also very nice, just because I think it adds, you know, another kind of layer that is somewhat academic. So I think it adds, you know, more research that you could kind of possibly do in that direction.
Yeah, I think definitely you use AI to use it as a sketching tool. So it's the exercise is almost like, you know, when you work for a star architect, you know, like the star architect just sketch something like really weird, you know, and then as the work, all of us have to just realize it. And like literally what you are doing is that, yeah, you are using the computer as a guide to create these like weird sketches. And it's really up to you how to really interpret that and really realize it into a space. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and I also thought that collecting the data in specific perspective is quite important in order to create the sketches that masters create and to really bring that into our project and interpret it in our own way. But I think the most of the time that we took was when we were selecting the data and sorting them out and categorizing them was put in there, and just creating these images didn't really take much long time. Yeah, that's what I just wanted to add on.
It's so weird but appealing, you know. It's like I've not seen these, I don't know, the partitions and everything. It works, but it's you know, so alien, but I like it.
Yeah, it's cool. I think maybe the dream is that this job is done by AI as well. You know? So you can create like different sketches, but yeah, AI can help you to model the sketched those yeah, into 3D model, and we can just pick and choose different 3D models. I don't know if that's good though. Yeah.
I have a question. Can you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. And thank you for presentation. And I have several questions for the unit and project. Actually, first of all, and as far as I understand, by using cycle gap as an image kind of merging things, and I think maybe better to focus on some part of architectural element, such as facade or material or some structure, etc. By doing that, we're gonna get much more clear kind of output in order to criticize, in order to make a feedback for the proposal, I think. But so in a way, I thought the cases project last workshop, he focusing on the facade on the city, and then produce some different levels of architecture, and or we can get a kind of a compare between new one and old one, I think. But in this proposal, it's kind of difficult to follow what kind of test you've done, because the special quality of architecture is consists of different kind of elements, such as tectonic, form, space, layer, material, etc. So how did you make a test with the cycle in order to make some further output as a test or proposal?
Sorry, I didn't catch you at the last moment. Can you repeat the last bit, because there was some noise.
What was the main kind of experimental criteria in order to merge panel building and kind of new modern architecture? How did you merge each other? So what kind of image mainly use that for that?
I think first of all, the Hanok image was separately sorted and in the relation to the categories that we were seeing right now, 5 of them, in which images that separately shows different aspects of Korean traditional architecture, which is tectonic, form, and space and layer material. And what StyleGAN does is that it's designed to really merge the image together and see the common features from both groups and to fuse them together. In that kind of process, the human cannot involve unless we change the code to make it to do other things. And I think we kind of, through these images, to really let the AI interpret it in their own non-biased aspect, and like to see it from the perspective that doesn't have the previous like prejudice about this building has to stand with this structure, or like this tectonic has to be applied in order to support the weight from the above building or something. And I think from that kind of interpretation, without considering about those realistic matters, AI kind of liberated us from thinking about what could work and what couldn't work. And I think that's why we used StyleGAN to experiment the mutation in a way. I think, I don't know if it answered your question.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying now, but as a result, as output, it's difficult to understand as a kind of new style, so new forms of architecture it is, for me. So final image is looking good, I think, interesting, but it still have a Hanok feeling, it's like, what is the modern and what could be the merging things, So for instance, the facade design from Sang-Yan saw yesterday, in the SIR works, I can get a sense of that because all kinds of different facades are merged each other by some degrees. So we can get a different quality of images of the facade. I can get it yesterday. But from those old images here, not sure, but all looking mostly more like Hanok rather than, I think, some new things. So I don't know.
I think
it's difficult to judge at this moment. But I think as far as I understand, you guys put maybe more too much kind of elements of architectural source in order to mix each other. So image has to be very specific, sophisticated to make AI works, I think.
Yeah, actually, I think I should jump on here. So the style again is kind of like the generalized tool compared to the cycle again. So what the style again did was to extract the different features in the different scale, like the ranging from like the small texture to the over the geometry of the building. So it's more like just generalizing these old features and then convert it into the numeric value. And then it gave us some of the chances to reproduce these kinds of image based on what they have learned from the features. So it's like I would say it's a little bit hard to the control for our intention. So the main job was to interpret, like decode these kinds of the black box, and then trying to like think about how we could use it as like some the design, the inspiration as the design the first phase. So yeah, you mentioned like very good comment, like we should have some the intention or like some the specific the elements. So this should be the, you know, like this is like very like short the workshop, and then we need to get the old students like very well generalized the tool to explore this the new kinds of the AI technology. So like as
Yeah.
you the point as you mentioned, it should be the next step to more dig into these kinds of the AI works, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think in a way, maybe we all know workshop, the period duration of workshop is quite short. So in a way, I better to maybe look at the much more like possibility of diagrammatic output from the unit 4 rather than perfect final images. You know, how we can get some different types, different quality of different images as a maybe diagrammatic some process rather than final render images. So that could be
Yeah.
much more interesting to give us idea of creativity rather than just automation as an AI tools.
Yeah.
So
That's
we are
also
doing
like,
those for the creativity, you know.
I think there's I mean, obviously diagrams kind of advocate for a very specific understanding, which is, I think, a simplified understanding. But I think what they tried to do was to really work with the images. So rather than having a spatial understanding or a kind of spatial configuration of some sort, I think they kind of try to get more of a feeling that you get from an image, which then they later try to convert that into a spatial quality. So I think maybe they could have reconfigured their image into a diagram and then made more variations, for instance, to kind of really extract the logic. But I see what you're trying to say.
yeah. And
but
I think,
yeah,
just go ahead.
Yeah, I think what's really important is that their focus, I think, was really on the perspective and the imagery of how, like, the feelings that you get in a Hanok house and in a modern apartment block. And I can see why you would think that it has more Hanok elements, but when Stargen also operates, it kind of picks up features unbiased, but it does, I think, pick up on more like stronger features. Am I saying it correct, Songyan? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think because Hanok has more dominant, more kind of overwhelming features, I think it also tends to kind of dominate the space rather than the modern housing.
Yeah, and I think also this group like well shows the potential of like this, like potential to use how we can use the GAN technology as some the design, the inspiration. So like comparing like this, so instead of like just utilizing this 2D image directly, they just try to convert it into the 3-dimensional quality, creating some the new dimension, like bringing the new dimension. So I think that's could be like very like good opportunity for the next step. I think just instead of like using it as like just images or some the diagrammatic stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah.
So I think I just want to open up some kind of question or some comments, and what is this workshop be? You know, workshop for instance, in order to use new technology as a design tools or as a design methodology, and we'd like to look at much more about how those technology will impact on our process. So what kind of different quality of proposal we can deliver, and then interpret those things compared to other ones. So in a way, I think as a just final images, for me, it's difficult to judge, how AI works for the proposal. So for as a final images, it shows the looking and aesthetic, etc. So I would like to see much more like critical point of view, how we can work with AI as our design partner, rather than just only aesthetic. So that's why I ask those things. So in a way, Unit 3 is quite interesting as well for me, and they are using CycleGAN as a design research methodology in order to decide for the urban studies. So it's quite the same tool, but you different unit using a different kind of way of using. So it will lead to maybe our converse could be that we can discuss about what we can maybe finalize for the workshop in order to make some knowledge for the architecture knowledge or our research. So that could be maybe some idea of that. We can maybe discuss on that.
So can you hear me? And what I felt was similar to Jaewon, because like the one you're talking about, typical architecture, is more about like productivity or efficiency and all the like these kind of economical values. But when you're ignoring all of these and then bring it to a new type, so for me, it should be have like bigger values instead of those things. But the one you showed me is like something is similar with like Korean barbecue interior design. So I think you have to mention like with this kind of tool, you can get like much bigger like possibility to something like, I think that was a little bit like confusing to me. That was the first question. And the second is like defining typical and untypical architecture is a little bit ambiguous to me, because like you mean like you're talking about like untypical as like traditional architecture, and typical is like other architecture. I think that's the too broad. So I think it's better to focus on like something like concrete architecture with wooden structure or something like, it should be more specific to bring some core ideas.
So when I was thinking about typical and untypical architecture, it was a result of almost like a frustration that I had just looking through like the Zine and Arc Daily and all these things. And I also realized that the scope of this cannot be narrowed down so much because it kind of included like a very generic agenda that I wanted to project towards research. So I definitely see how wide and unspecific it is, and I think it's something that I would have to work on further for sure. But I think when it comes to these, like, Sungma, can you go to your last image, the one with the sketch? Yeah, I think. Yeah, that one, this one. I think this definitely embeds, in my mind at least, more kind of functionality and minimality that they understood as typical architecture, or the origin of typical architecture, because it really removes more kind of not tedious but more delicate details that would, for instance, cost a lot of money and time to produce. So just in kind of retaining the feeling of it, but removing the needs to have to craft all that already, I think, shows some result in merging the two kind of purposes. And yeah, so I see what you mean when you say with some other images like a Korean barbecue house analogy. But I don't think this specific image, for instance, is that case. I think it really, I think this is quite a successful image in what they were trying to do, especially with the concept they wanted to push alongside with high end and all those things. I don't know. I mean, that's just my opinion.
But it was a kind of joke, but all the images are really fascinating, of course.
But I think it is true that the limitation of style can merely translate the styles from one to the other. Yeah, so it's not really trying to resolve anything else. But of course, in a bigger picture, AI with different GANs, I don't know much about them, but you can do so much more. I think, yeah. For example, you can maybe kind of, you had some promises in the earlier brief where we met, like prior to the workshop. You were mentioning about some plan layouts of Hanok and like modern houses layouts, and maybe some styles can be also associated with some planar layout, and maybe some mutations can happen in the same time, and the planar layouts can actually suggest certain styles in interior spaces, or because this one also doesn't encounter any like structural principle. For example, Hanok has certain very specific structural principle with like this timber-based structure, right? And the modern house has like a lot of different types of structure. Maybe then maybe these styles can also represent, or is the data sets can be paired with some kind of structural principles, and maybe those can migrate at the degree between certain structural principles to the other, like for example, from timber structure to a brick structure, and then when the degree migrates from one to the other, the style also transfers, or something like that. I think it sounds more difficult. Yeah, but I know I know Casey like showed me one of his project that like I really liked it, but I could never find it online. Yeah, but he trained like facades to understand like. I think he went to like Hong Kong or Japan or something. He trained a lot of AI images so they can associate the interior layout and the facade. So now if you can just scan any facade, it assumes what's the interior layout. Yeah. So you can like kind of estimate the cost of it, for example. Yeah, so I thought that's like really interesting. Yeah, so in that video, like he showed me like when the video migrates from one style of the facade to the other, it generates plans and the generated interior spaces, like interior image. So I thought that's so interesting that you can associate the interior and the facade. So facade style can be an input, and then it generates an interior image. You know, I don't know how he did it, but like I thought that's super cool. Yeah, and there are a lot of things that is potentially can be done, but I think still I appreciate the trial of using a very specific tool to try to run a workshop and try to also propose a project. I think, yeah, it involves a lot of like learning and teaching and production. Yeah, but
So
I also agree with the critics. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
no, I just want to add to what you were saying, because it's a limitation of the tool as well, as you said, and we're obviously not as skilled as Casey. I think he's very skilled in what he does, and we first tried to are generated usually through people and through a degree of interpretation already. StyleGAN couldn't actually pick up on plans, and they just always made the exact same one. It just didn't work. so I think we just have to figure out a better way to kind of. I mean, I would have to, if I ever see Casey, I would have to ask how that could be possible. Because yeah, it's difficult.
I don't think every single of us needs to know how to code or how to do things. I think we need to understand what are the potentials of certain tools that are available to us, and I think that is like much more valuable and important. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think the use of like the different GAN model is strongly related to what we wanted to achieve out of the model. So in the cases in our unit, we just wanted to see some of the generative features through the lens of the intelligence. So yeah, so it's, as I said, like it strongly depends on some of the certain the purpose. So if we wanted to achieve some the certain stuff, we need to more fine tune the model to achieve the goal. So that means if we have some more specified the goal, we can more narrow down our the model to get the results. So that should be some the next step further.
Yeah, I hope so, because clear aim is very important for the workshop, I think, in order to open the discussion, in order to develop each other's, I think. So, you know, a clear aim or clear methodology should be prepared and achieve certain levels of it to open up those things. So I hope to see much more things later on. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we do understand that the, I mean, this cannot be solved everything, and then of course that the 7 days or 8 days is not enough to like we have in that kind of depth. But I mean, that's why, and then in this point, like yeah, that's why the our social algorithm is quite like pretty much good, like okay, say that workshop series because we can investigate it about same kinds of the same within the same concept, either like within the same idea, we can try to investigate a bit different way within the similar concept of the idea. So I mean, yeah, I think that's what we have. I mean, that's which is like one of the our strong point as well. Like in general of the social algorithm workshop, I'm saying. So maybe next time, I mean next year, we can do the style again probably. I mean just I mean I'm saying, but like but yeah, we try to investigate totally different ways. For example, I mean then maybe we could find another interesting things as well. I mean I'm just saying, yeah.
Okay, Singmuk, I think you can unshare the screen so I can
Mhm.
see everybody. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any, maybe, shall we just exchange some closing comments from each of us, or, yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah,
Everybody volunteer.
we're supposed to discuss like from now till 1 hour.
You don't have to. You don't have to.
I mean, like just according to the schedule.
I think, oh, I listened to same comment today, which is short time of workshop, right? So I think 8 days is a short time to do something, especially for me as well. So I all the time struggle with how to manage, how to make a output in order to make a good discussion for the workshop for 8 days. You know, so I think it's nice time to talk about and how can we do without 8 days, or without expand more days, or without to focusing some part of design research for 8 days. You know, maybe each unit having different kind of perspective, different kind of expectation for the workshop. So why don't we talk about a little bit about that based on our experience for this workshop? Especially maybe students could say that as well, right? So they participate in the workshop for 8 days. So what is the nice things for the workshop, or so what is the kind of what could be changed later on for that?
Do you want to discuss about the length of the workshop?
Length of workshop, we
Clear now?
yes, yeah.
I think that will be quite a long discussion.
Okay.
But I agree that we probably need to have maybe a separate session. Well, today it was really good to hear and see all the other units' presentation thoroughly. And here in offsite seminar room, we had a bit of a discussion that maybe we were in a way too ambitious to do all the researches and the proposals and something to discuss about, etc., etc. So maybe it's a good timing for us, all of us, to think about what we really want to focus on this short workshop and what we actually want to do. But not, I'm not saying that we need to discuss that right now, yeah.
But maybe we can get some feedback from the tutor, especially the new coming teachers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, about their experience and what do they feel like about the format. Yeah, and if there can be anything improved or what was a benefit. but I know everybody knows about the program very well already, although you teach for the first time. Yeah, but yeah, I would love to. It will be very, very beneficial to hear your feedback.
Yeah.
Imagine you can start. Wait,
No feedback.
Please spit it out, Lloyd. Jeho.
No comments.
I think he's leaving. Okay, this leaves me. All right,
Yeah,
he
also-
came close.
Yeah, also from students as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And any of you are here, if you have any feedback to us, if you are shy, you can just put it on the chat. I can read for you.
I mean, I think it's just I've not actually had any workshop through Zoom before, so it's just probably, you know, limitations imposed by the format of the workshop rather than the actual agenda of the workshop. One thing that I think I find really interesting is the kind of divide between social and kind of digital, and also us being the hybrid one. Because I'm really not a digital person. And I just never thought I would touch deep learning in the next coming few years. So I really appreciated it though, because it kind of forced me to kind of go out of comfort zone and really kind of saw the potential. So I think it's a really good, like, I think it would be almost more helpful to see a bit of a underlining kind of similarity between different units. I think the scope was quite big, and I think that was also really interesting because the scope was so big. But I think if there's a more specific kind of purpose or answer that we're all looking for together, I think it could be interesting, but through different means as well. Yeah, and I think it's a really good way to kind of involve people who are not interested in, you know, this computational side of architecture, because I really had no idea about anything. I mean, I know how to open Grasshopper maybe, and do like a few surfaces, but that's really it. And who would have thought that I'll find Cycle and Stargen interesting? So I think it was a really eye-opening in that way.
You sound like a 50s. But you look so young. Yeah.
I mean, it's not a comment, but I wanted to ask if there is any possibility of progressing what we have done throughout this course of workshop, and just not to end right here and there, and we can like further research about the project and just like make the changes. And I think I wanted to know if there is any way that we can like come together again to make it as a linear work rather than just one-time use. And I think that'll be really interesting to look at.
That sounds like what we always dream of. Yeah, we would love anybody who learn from here, like to continue that to your studies, or like probably difficult to team up like exactly in that way, but really have some impact in your learning. Yeah, and from my experience, like there has been earlier years what students learned from this workshop. They find it interesting, but they just think, oh, it's just a trial, and they don't continue it. But I see more and more that actually really gets continued, and you continue that interest and you find it useful. And I think that is a very good a kind of a fruit from this let's say series or let's say workshop series. Yeah, so I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah, that you have that desire to continue. Yeah, I hope you, even if there is very little chance to gather together again, but I hope you can really continue your interest and keep in touch with us. Yeah, and keep in touch with everybody, and keep this network and keep this learning enthusiasm. I think that's something what we are like we really like dream of. Yeah, we want to expand our network and just become bigger. Yeah,
and come back to teach.
yeah, and come back to teach. Yeah, and can become our teacher.
I
Well,
think
actually,
it's also
students from last year has continued their work and developed, and then their works were exhibited and then being published, and that's being continued for actually more than a year, and we've seen that they are still working recently as well. So I think it's all open, and then we know that the people who participate in these kind of workshops are always very ambitious. And if anybody is suggesting that kind of a team up, further teamwork, I think there will be a lot of people to agree and start working. So yeah, by all means, please do.
I'll make sure I do. Thank you.
I just I think it's also quite important. I mean, as you said, it's like I heard that you want to kind of continue this long continued progress throughout the workshops, but then I'm also aware that it has to be open enough for other students who want to jump in to be able to jump in later on. So I think it's such a huge challenge. And I ran a collective before called Volume 64. And what I did was I just had like a very, I guess, simple enough format that everyone can follow, and an agenda that was put forward each season. And then everyone who kind of jumps in between the season, I just let them know about the new agenda, but then, the running idea was the same. So we could kind of always continue and build up on what we wanted to do. But I also see that, this workshop is a lot more complex in scale and concept as well. So.
But if you have your own pedagogical methods, you can bring that in as well. We can experiment. Yeah, if you have that kind of like very simple, straightforward, if you require that kind of straightforwardness, and if you like to kind of establish some kind of longer running project or workshop series or something like that, like we can always create some kind of platform. Yeah, so I think our kind of pedagogy or like a teaching methods is not fixed or it's yeah, it's very open. Yeah, it's depending on the tutors. Yeah.
Just wanted to ask one more question. I'm pretty sure it's all written on the website, but I just want to know like the simplest term of the goal of this research group, just to like sum it up all together to say it in the simplest way. I just wanted to.
Purpose is there.
I think
I think it's-
to make the world more interesting.
I think we want to open up the system, open up a platform for anybody who's interested in these issues can join. I think that's our ultimate goal. Because, because we always want to learn something from others, and that's why we're making this system sort of open. So each workshop, we are inviting more people, more new people, and then now we're opening up for, we've got the open call for tutors as well to bring up the new sort of new design methodology and new teaching methodologies, etc. So.
I think we are aiming to make us an open system as a workshop platform, for including workshop and researching and symposium, etc. So we are trying to do that. We have some kind of realistic issues all the time. So let's see. We are trying to do. Thank you for asking that. Thanks a lot.
And I'm so sorry. Like, I have so many questions. I just wanted to know is there any involvement of the AA school? Because since it's saying AA visiting school in a way, and I wanted to know, is there any input that they have made throughout the course of the workshop for this year specifically, or like throughout the general agenda?
Well, Cindy, do you want to answer first?
Yeah, I think AA is kind of also operating like a platform. So they accepted our agenda and our program. Yeah, and then after that point is really up to the tutors. And the thing they are really emphasizing is the diversity of agenda. So there is no single unit or agenda is actually same. That's why you can already see here already like two different, like radically different agenda, or like today you saw 4 different types of like methods, right? So that kind of diversity is really appreciated. Yeah. But AA itself, there's no like direct input, or they're not controlling us or something. Yeah. It's just a platform that we are like, as a network, we're connected. Yeah.
And also, they've been sort of not, I don't want to say reviewing, but we've been keeping in touch. So between the other visiting schools, we are kind of learning from each other how they've been teaching and how they've been sort of structuring their schools and agendas. And oh, maybe this is a good timing to promote something. Can I share my screen? As part of this, well, the visiting school Korea is hosting the AA Global Forum next month. So AA Global Forum is the sort of a new form of an event organized by the AABS. And then I think Melbourne was the first, and the second location was the Caribbean, and the Global Forum Korea is the third one. So we are having this in as part of the Kia 한국 건축할 때 Kia events in November. So if I can just let you know that. Hold on. Yeah, the Kia 100 Architects exhibition in November, and we are having this AA alumni exhibition for process and diversity opening on 11th of November as well, and the AA Global Forum about the K apartment issue will be held on Tuesday, 16th of November. So this will be held in person in the culture station in Seoul 284 and also online. So you can probably go back to the AA website and probably find more details about it. Yeah, that's about it.
Wasn't there an email about an open call?
Open call for what?
For the AA forum, some like I saw the email and then
Yeah, about to join the exhibition, the online exhibition, I think.
yeah, is it still available to apply or is it closed?
Yes, yes. Especially for you, Lloyd. It's open.
Thank you. I'll check the email and then send it to you ASAP.
All right. Okay. Is there anybody who wants to say something? No, all very tired now.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, great
Thank
job
you.
for 2 days of the symposium. Yeah. For those of you who joined for 2 days, thank you. If you joined for part-time, also really appreciate and thank you all the students and tutors presented, prepared all this. Yeah, really appreciate and thank you. Yeah, everybody, yeah, here to give us comments. Yeah, and Hanjun?
I wanted to say anyway, yesterday's symposium and today's super great, we're going to be published on our YouTube as well. So if there is any sensitive things like you don't want to publish, please let me know so I can hide it from the like publish. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Great. Thank you.
Right, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you very much. Bye. Good night. Good night, Hanjun and Tongyu.
Yeah.
Good night.
Yeah.
I'm
For staying for so late.
I'm
Yeah.
mourning actually.
Yeah. Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.